it's your first night here or haven't been here, we've been reading out of 1 Peter. Rick and I have been doing some studies on 1 Peter, and that's basically what Stand is based on right now. So continuing on, I'm going to be preaching to you out of 1 Peter chapter 13, verse 22. And I labeled it, Finding Hope in God's Makeover. Okay. 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 13 through 22 says, "As obedient children, let yourselves be pulled into a way of life shaped by God's life, a life energetic and blazing with holiness. God said, 'I am holy, therefore you be holy.'" Well, what is holiness? Holiness is accepting what God has worked up for you behind the scenes. It's accepting a makeover given by him for us, compliments of his grace and love. Holiness is what accents who we are as God's children. It's what characterizes who we're going to be and who we are at this point in our life. It was made to be embraced, and it was made to be outlived. To do that, you have to accept it, believe in it, trust in it, receive it, and give it. Just like that God's chisel skit. You have to accept the fact that you were made holy to be holy. If you go throughout the Bible, you will realize that God has taken the outcasts, the underdogs, the underprivileged, the unworthy, and the bad boys and the bad girls of the Bible. He reminded them of their makeover, and they were used to sustain some of the greatest tests of faith, but they also received the greatest fulfillment of all time. To live in the Bible is living examples of how God's grace makes us who we never thought we could be. I stand in front of you tonight, amplifying my struggles, and knowing that I cannot live in perfection. Excuse me. That unfortunately, I hold the hammer of sin on Jesus more oftentimes than not. But I am reminded that God's grace is more than enough for me and for everyone else who's hearing me speak tonight. My biggest sin is falling short of his faith in me. But God chose me to choose these words to speak to you tonight. I am a living example of being that underdog and that outcast that God has used to utilize this message to you tonight. I need to be mindful of this gift that I tend to forget is there, oftentimes too much, and I'm sure those of you have done the same. It's God's grace. I need my soul to shake from it and my heart to be saturated with it, because without it, I'm nothing. I have no understanding of who I am as a person. In every way you can imagine, his love is stronger than every sin that you've ever committed and every sin that you're ever going to commit. He knows you're going to commit it, and he also knows when you're going to commit it. There is hope for the sinful. That hope is believing that there is hope. God has written his grace throughout the entire Bible. Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 through 28. Godlike. God created human beings, and he created them godlike. Before we even knew it, we were already made in his image. Again, his image, not our own image. Not as we see ourselves, but as he sees us. His image is not distorted, nor is it broken. It is full of hope, peace, understanding, and grace. Again, 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 16 through 18. From the outside looking in. Even though on the outside it tends to seem that everything around us is falling apart, nothing is going right, you can't do anything right, you can't say anything right, and everyone around you can't do anything right or say anything right, that's where God is making a new life. Not a day will pass without his unfolding grace on you and on them. With this said, you're probably wondering, how is it that God can love me before, during, and after sin? I know that I think that more times than not. As a matter of fact, I'm sure I'll probably think it sometime tomorrow. Because, again, that's what's being human. You always remind yourself of what's wrong with you. But I have a different answer for you. He does because you were made in his image. You are a creation of God's. God doesn't make mistakes. He doesn't make any imperfections. Only we make the imperfections. But again, his grace is there to cover that up, to make it better. He has the hope in you that he is constantly yearning for you to have in him. He is making you over even when you don't realize it. That grace is at work in your life when the trials and the tribulations are upon you. Again, again, 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 8 through 9. Grace is enough. Simply stated, my grace is enough. My strength comes into your weaknesses. When I read this verse, and I've read it in the past, it gives me this vision of God as a blanket, a security blanket, a fireproof shield. No matter how unsafe you feel and how much fire that you've stirred within yourself or within others, he is there to tell you that no matter what is going on or what you are doing, my grace is going to be the superpower that you need, the invincibility to keep going through the fear and the fire. Think about that for a minute. There's something out there that is strong enough to conquer every fear and every piece of fire that you've ever felt in your heart, every tear that you've ever cried, every pain that you ever felt. There's something out there that's going to save you from that. Again, Galatians chapter 3, verse 12. By law we fail, but by hope we live. It is impossible to live a life that isn't focused on perfection. As I said, we were made to be imperfect. Striving to be perfect is one thing, but constantly tearing yourself down for not being perfect is not how God planned it. As a human, though we may have or may have not have chosen God, we were made to sin. But we were also made in an image that cannot be distorted in God's eyes. Like they said, you can't be messed up in God's eyes. Stand up as his version of you, not as your version of yourself. He doesn't wait on perfection. He waits on belief in the hope that he fulfills with his grace. We live right, not exactly by dropping the hammer of sin, but by embracing what God has for us in this life, and knowing that the hammer of sin that we crucified Jesus with can be dropped in the hope that we already are forgiven for sinning against him. Can you imagine how stress-free we could be if we just always knew and understood that though we sin today, tomorrow is a new day in Christ's eyes? We are being made new when we feel old and set in our ways. And I found out that you can't teach an old dog new tricks. I consider myself one of those people. We are considered alive even in death, and we are established in a hope that cannot be shaken. We prosper in trials, and we are the strongest in our weaknesses. And I'm here to tell you that there is prosperity in pain. I want to close with this verse. 1 John chapter 4, verse 17 is the foundation of God's grace and God's love. God is love. When we take up permanent residence in a life of love, we live in God and he lives in us. We were made to be loved by him, to stand in hope that you can be holy, to stand as God's version of you and who you are to him. What do all of these verses stand for, and what do they represent? They represent God's ability to never make a mistake, to never make an imperfection, to extend grace to all those that he made in the beginning, and to realize that we cannot live by the law of the holy, but we can live in the hope of holiness. God has arranged for us to be holy. It was premeditated. And embracing that fact in itself is being holy. To stand as a witness to his promises and to live them out in the faith that we bear in his everyday perfection. God has made us over before we were even given the right to make a different decision. He is now calling us to accept that makeover and to be painted by his grace. As the worship team comes up, I would like anyone who is interested to go ahead and step in front of our makeshift stage right here. You're gonna find a coffee can, because I forgot the bowl, of water. With that, there's a rag next to it. This mirror is going to represent the image of yourself when you stand before it. What I want you to do is take your fingertips and wipe your fingertips, smudge the mirror. After that's completed, go ahead and dip the rag in the water. That rag is going to represent God's grace. I want you to wipe the smudges off and think about how God is wiping you clean every second of every single day. You are beautiful to him, and no matter what you think of yourself, he likes you just the way you are.